Which free agents will and should the Cowboys bring back this offseason? We'll tell you on this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL, all lowercase, to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can follow him on Twitter at McCoolBCB. So on today's show, we're going to take a look at all of the Cowboys free agents and discuss which ones make the most sense to bring back with the new coaching staff, because I don't think every player is a great fit with Brian Schottenheimer, with Matt Eberflus, with Clayton Adams. So let's start with the offense. Now, they don't have as many free agents on offense, but let's run through some names. Rico Dowdle, free agent running back, ran for 1,000 yards last year, 1,300 yards from scrimmage. Do you think he's a good fit with Eberflus? Or sorry, with Schottenheimer?
I think he would do fine in Eberflus too. I think that, we saw him have success last year. I mean, obviously, we expect the Schottenheimer system to be, pretty close to what we saw last year, maybe with some slight adjustments, because you mentioned Clayton Adams coming in and kind of broadening the horizon of the run game a little bit. And obviously that directly impacts, what Rico would be doing. I think he's shown to be kind of a very versatile back. I think he's probably the most talented for his age and price range that you're going to be able to get in the free agent market. I think he's going to be a good bargain. Let's put it that way in the free agent market. I think he understands what it's like to play here. He's, there's obviously some familiarity there. I think it's probably a 50-50 proposition, to be honest. Like, they may want to go a whole new direction in the running back room. But having said that, like, if you go and look at what, it's a lot like what we've talked about with at times with the coaching situation, right? Like, it's nice to talk about like going in a different direction, but you go look at the free agent market, and Rico might be the best player available, right? So, in a world that you probably are going to need to go, I mean, you are going to need to go and get at least 2, probably 3 running backs this offseason in some form or fashion. I think it makes sense to sign one, at least a veteran in free agency. Why not sign the guy that you have some familiarity with? I have a belief that he can, kind of adjust to things and learn to the new system if he needs to.
My guess is that he is going to come back probably on a 2-year, $8 to $10 million deal, something that's very, very cheap for the Cowboys that they can get out of after 1 year. I do think he comes back because he played in this offense before last year was pretty successful. Let's move on to some other players. How about Zach Martin, who we still don't know if Zach Martin wants to play next year, but let's go with the assumption that he does, right? And that he would like to come back to Dallas. Do you think he's a good fit?
I think that in this specific scenario, it might be best for the Cowboys to try to find a clean break. And this might be the time to do this, right? I understand that there's a chance that he could be healthy and you might get some shadow of what you saw previously in Zach Martin. And I think that could still be a good NFL player. However, I think you survived the back end of last year, without him. And at times, obviously, it even got pretty decent without him. I think with the new offensive line coach, a kind of a new breath of fresh air in the offensive line room in general, maybe this is your opportunity to kind of say, you know what, we love you, Zach. So you've played incredible for us, but considering the cost that it's probably what it's going to cost us to bring you back, it may be time for us to kind of start looking for that future solution now, because we've got bodies here, and this is a class where there's lots of these tackles that can play guard, right? So there are options that the Cowboys wanted to solve this in the draft.
I also don't know if they want to go year by year anymore with Zach Martin, because I feel like it just puts them where it puts them in an awkward spot where they can't completely rebuild this offensive line the way they'd like to. And the other thing is, if he's asking for 15, 16 million a year, he got 20 million per year on his last deal. I don't think he's getting that. 15 to 16 million a year is quite a bit of money for a guard that's aging, that wasn't able to stay on the field last year. I think I'd rather devote some of that money to defense, which needs more depth. They need to keep some of the players. We'll get to them in a second. I love Zach Martin. I've got his autographed jersey hanging up right behind me, but it might be best to just part ways here.
Yeah, I mean, I think at this point, if you're paying him, $12 to $15 million to play guard, like that's a lot of sentimental money that you're paying, not maybe what he's worth. So at this point in his career.
Yeah, and Micah Parsons also had an interesting comment yesterday when he was at Media Row.
Yes.
And he basically said he thinks it's good that they're kind of resetting and letting some of the young guys become the leaders. They feel like there was a mismatch of regimes a little bit. And I think moving on from some of these older players would probably allow guys like Dak and Micah and CD to become more of the leaders of this team.
Yeah, and I think you felt a little bit of the changing of the guard last year at the end of the year, and that was one of the things we talked about, that we felt like maybe the only benefit that the Cowboys could get out of last season is that you saw guys like Micah and like CD start to actually take hold of the leadership positions on this team, and maybe this would further that effort.
Yep. All right, how about Brandon Cooks, who is a free agent after spending the last 2 years with Dallas? Do you want to bring him back?
This one really is tough for me. Like, I think it depends on what he's looking for money wise. Obviously, he's not the player that he once was.
No.
I think I would look into it, but only if the money were such that I could still feel comfortable drafting a guy if I wanted to. Look.
What if it's like 2 years, 20 million?
I don't know. I think at this point, like, I almost feel like the Cowboys need to focus on getting an offensive weapon out of this draft class, like with one of their early picks. And I don't want Brandon Cooks signing to deter that. So I'm okay with signing him hypothetically to those numbers, but only if that doesn't preclude Dallas from potentially pulling the trigger in the first round on another offensive weapon that to kind of help things out.
Yeah, I agree. I like Brandon Cooks. I still think he can have a lot of value, but I almost think he needs to go to a team that already has like an established number one and number two, and he can just be the third guy that comes in on third downs and certain packages. I wonder at this stage of his career, being a wide receiver 2 is a little bit too much for him.
I'm wondering, yeah. I mean, look, if he's willing to play that role on this team, I'd love to have him in that.
It's just
role.
Who is the wide receiver 2 here?
That's the thing, is like, if the plan is to bring him back on a contract that you are okay with, if you need to give him wide receiver 3 snaps, that's what I'm looking for. Because then you leave a hole at the wide receiver 2 spot going into the draft that you could easily fill.
I just think he needs to be, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but like, imagine him in Philly as the third receiver with AJ Brown and Devontae Smith, or with the Vikings with Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison. Like, I just think at this stage of his career, that's what he needs to be. And unfortunately, Cowboys don't have that wide receiver 2 yet. I still think they're hoping that Jalen Tolbert can be the wide receiver 3. So
yeah,
it stinks, but I kind of think they probably should move on, because I do like Brandon Cooks quite a bit. Let's talk about some defensive players. There are a couple other guys on offense I want to get to in a little bit at the end of the show, but let's get to some guys on defense, some aging veterans that we're going to debate if the Cowboys should bring back. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here. 1 game, 2 teams, endless possibilities, and there is no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action. With live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. I made a bet this morning, both teams to convert on fourth down. I think it was minus 125. You just know that the Eagles and the Chiefs are going to be aggressive in this game. The Eagles are going to run that tush push probably 15 times. One of my favorite bets on the board. Go download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5. And if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That is FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, the official partner of Super Bowl 59. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Later, let's go over to the defensive side of the ball where they have a lot of free agents. Let's start with the non-older player like Osa Odighizuwa, who we've talked about a lot. We talked about him with Cody, getting ready for that show. Do you think Osa is somebody who fits well with Matt Eberflus?
Yeah, I mean, I think in a lot of ways he does. I mean, look, he's a little bit more undersized, but I think that's the case for, I mean, that's who he is. He's undersized for any defense as a defensive tackle. He's a very undersized under tackle. But even Eberflus, who prefers kind of the bigger guys to be more gap sound, I think could find a way to use Osa. I don't think, he is unsound in his gap defense when he's been asked to do that, because he plays so low to the ground, because he has good leverage. He certainly can be moved at times, but I think it's not any worse than you see than a lot of these other kind of more pass rush specialist defensive tackles. I do think that the Cowboys are going to need to get free agent bodies at defensive tackle, regardless of what they do, right? Even if they re-sign Osa. So I do think that they're going to, I mean, maybe I shouldn't say free agent, but I think they're definitely going to be in the market for adding defensive tackle bodies regardless, right?
Well, and that's the trade-off. Would you rather see the Cowboys, like, let's say it's $20 million, make it nice and easy, 3 years, $60 million for Osa, or would you rather see them sign like 3 defensive tackles for a combined $22 million?
Well, I think you kind of have to find a way. I think you're right. Like, in order to pay Osa, you're going to have to rob Peter, right? To pay Paul a little bit here.
You're not going to have a lot of depth at that position, which is fine.
And that's why I think in the past I've kind of hinted at maybe what you do is do something like look at Terrence Steele's contract, right? And see, like, maybe you can figure that out in the draft, as opposed to trying to figure out the immediate starter at under tackle, because that's the issue. Is that I think that there's a lot of good under tackles in this draft class. I don't know how many outside of picking somebody at 12, which feels like an overdraft for a lot of these guys not named Mason Graham. I don't know how many of these guys you're going to take in the second round that you're going to feel fantastic about them being your full-time starter right away, right?
Well, and look how long it's taken for Osa. Really, Osa didn't break out until year 3, and he was, one of the few that did hit.
I do think that what they should do is still, they should sign Osa, figure out a way to sign Osa, and then still potentially get another defensive tackle in this class, just because it's deep, maybe in the 3rd or 4th round, because there's just a lot of these guys in this class. And you just need the depth, right? Outside of Osa, you've got Justin Rogers, and basically that's it, right? Yeah. So you need bodies at the position, and different types of bodies. I understand, like, you've got resource allocation, but I think Osa is a guy that's kind of rare and hard to find in the NFL, a pass rushing defensive tackle that has that kind of success. It's a tough situation, but he's one of the few guys that the Cowboys probably should consider buckling up and paying the money when they normally would not.
All right, let's get to some veterans. What about DeMarcus Lawrence, who I think missed all of the season except for 4 games? He got hurt in the Giants game. He's indicated that he wants to continue to play. Would you bring him back?
I think I would. I think it depends on the number he's looking for. Look, DeMarcus Lawrence had a really great 4 weeks before he got injured. Like, he had 3 sacks and a forced fumble and was making splash plays.
He was awesome in 2023, right?
Yeah. I think clearly the Cowboys have found something here with him in this kind of limited role. Now, obviously the Liz Frank injury is disheartening, and it kind of broke a streak of health that he had since being in this sort of new, more rotational role. But I still think that if the Cowboys can find a deal that is suitable for both sides and he is healthy, man, I mean, he's such a skill-based player that I think that even if he's lost just an ounce of explosiveness coming back this year, which is probably likely, I still think he's a valuable player because I think he's going to be strong against the run. And as a pass rusher, he doesn't use explosiveness as much as hand technique to get around. I think he'll still be an effective pass rusher.
I love Tank, but this one's really hard for me because now we had this stretch where he stayed relatively healthy over the last couple of years, but man, he just has a long history of foot injuries. He had a
and Frank's tough, right?
Yeah,
like, it's a tough injury.
Especially for a player in their 30s that's as
fair.
big as he is. He has a history of back injuries. Like, I would be in on bringing Tank back at like the $4 to $5, $6 million a year.
Exactly.
If it's anything more than that, and if it's anything beyond 1 year, I think I'd rather spend that money on a younger player. You can get young pass rushers. We saw even someone like Dante Fowler last offseason go for only a couple million. Now, I know he's not the run defender, but I get nervous when we're talking about players in their 30s with foot injuries.
Well, at that point, you can start rotating. Maybe you start talking about, I don't know if he's on the list, but Chauncey Golston, right? And see, maybe
he's on the third segment. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think he's a guy that, maybe if you've determined that Tank's money is too much, maybe you pivot to a Chauncey Golston. We'll talk about whether he's a fit or not in the second half, but in the third segment. But I think that's likely what you would probably do is you got to see what Tank's interested in doing. Hopefully he understands that he's also an aged veteran come off Liz Frank injury. Maybe they could work something out. If they can't, maybe you go to Golston and see what he wants.
What about Jordan Lewis? This is another 30-year-old player that has, again, a history of foot injuries. What do you do?
Yeah, I mean, he played so fantastic this year, and I do think that a large portion of that is because the Zimmer defense really does kind of feature that nickel role. I think it depends on the money as well, really. I just don't know what his market is going to look like. I imagine that it's going to be much higher than it had been in previous seasons. And if he's going to go,
same thing, teams get worried about paying nickel corners that are 30 years old that much money.
And we know him as more talented than it's widely known around the league, but I doubt it. Like, I wouldn't be shocked if a team like Detroit, where he's from, despite the fact that the wide receivers there hate him, if they didn't throw him a healthy bag and he just decided, hey, maybe I'll just go home, finish career in Detroit, I wouldn't be shocked. I think it depends on the number, but if not, look, Eberflus has shown a propensity to be able to develop these kind of nickel players. And I think he did a good job in Chicago. He's in the Colts, he was able to find different guys. So
Kenny Moore had a breakout season there with him.
Yeah,
it's just, you already are going to need corners with Trayvon Diggs being hurt, with Kalen Carson being hurt, with Josh Butler being hurt. The last thing you want to do is try to replace two corners. So I think I probably would be good bringing Jordan Lewis back with the idea that, hey, we've got to continue to add depth and numbers at that spot. And we know this isn't a long-term solution, but we kind of have to. What about Eric Kendricks, who played really well with Mike Zimmer? Do you bring him back in Eberflus's defense?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really, to me, that's a really specific, kind of scheme-based question, right? Because my question is how much of Kendrick's kind of resurgence was specifically because he just fully understood Zimmer's defense and understood how to operate and create plays in there more than, because it felt like he played better this last year than he did on the tape that I saw with the Chargers, which I think gives me two thoughts. Like, is he having a late career resurgence at that age, or is it again specifically because he played with Zimmer? So I think I would look at the market a little bit and see what the situation is. There's a guy that I think we need to have a discussion about in the third segment that I think also falls under interesting fits, that may be ready to kind of be a guy to potentially step up and try to take his place a little bit internally. But I think you have to look at the free agent market. You got to look at the draft class and see if Eberflus is going to have hard feelings here, right? Because Eberflus specifically is a linebackers guy, right? Yeah. So I think it's going to all be about feel and about, how much of is he a scheme fit, and not even just a scheme fit, but like, do you get that kind of supercharged Kendricks, that bonus Kendricks that you get in a Zimmer defense under an Eberflus scheme?
I mean, if he wants to come back to the exact contract he had last year, which was the vet minimum, it's hard to say no. It's like, hey, this is at least a quality linebacker. Our starting linebacker is going to be out for most of the season, if not all. At least you bring him back and you have an NFL linebacker going into draft weekend. It's not a bad philosophy to have, but I also wouldn't be surprised if Kendricks looks at this and be like, hey, this is not the defense that I know. I want to go somewhere else. Or if the Cowboys are just like, hey, let's use these roster spots to get some players with more sideline to sideline speed. We already have Maris Leafau, who we know is going to, or we hope that's going to be maybe that downhill thumper. Let's get some guys in here with some athleticism. I'm going to be really curious to see what happens with Eric Kendricks. Later, let's talk about some players that are interesting fits with the new coaching staff, because there are quite a few of them. We will run through them next. This episode is brought to you by Betterhelp. What are some of your relationship green flags? We often hear about the red flags we should avoid, but what if we focus more on identifying the positive signs in our relationship, those green flags? Well, if you're not sure what they look like, therapy can help you identify them, actively practice them, and even embody that green flag energy yourself. Whether you're dating, you're married, you're building a relationship, or just working on yourself, therapy can help you form relationships that you love back. Therapy helps you develop healthy boundaries and improves your communication skills. It empowers you to set clear expectations and express your needs in relationships. Therapy provides tools for managing conflict in ways that strengthen your connections rather than break them down. BetterHelp makes it easy by offering online therapy with over 30,000 licensed therapists to choose from. And if you need to switch therapists, you can do so at no extra cost. Discover your relationship green flags with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That is BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the new Locked On NFL show. 2 shows every single day. One in the morning with Tyler Rowland, one in the afternoon with Tony Wiggins, available wherever you get your podcasts. All right, Lane, I've got a list of interesting players for the new system. Let's run through. I mean, there's a lot of them. Let's run through some of these quickly. Cooper Rush.
I think it's probably time to start figuring out a different situation here. I mean, I don't know what he's going to be asking, but I mean, if it's really cheap, I wouldn't be surprised if it was a 1-year deal, just while they figure something out. But I also, another deal where, maybe this is time for a new situation.
Trey Lance.
I don't think he fits now. I think, that was, I don't know, maybe it really depends on the market now. Maybe his market is even further depressed because McCarthy's not going to be in the coaching, situation this next year. So it depends on the deal.
Chauncey Golston.
I think Golston is a guy that, like we said, if you need to pivot to him, if you can't get a cheap deal out of Lawrence, I would love to have him back, because I do think that you can have him rush the passer on third down as an inside guy. You're going to need help there. He could be a powerful, strong side defensive end, which I think he proved that he could do better this year than he had done in previous years.
I want Golston back because I feel like he is an ascending player. We saw at the end of 2023 start to play better. This year played the best football of his career. I think he's only 26 years old.
Yep.
And I think he's kind of that long, athletic edge rusher that you want opposite of Micah Parsons. And maybe he's just a bridge to a guy that you draft in round 1 or round 2 this year. But with the injury to Sam Williams, with Marshawn Nealon still being a young player who didn't play a ton as a rookie,
right,
I think Golston's somebody that I would love to see them bring back. But I also won't be surprised if you see some of these really smart teams out there that like to have like heavy rotations, like the Chiefs, the Ravens, kind of sniff around here, because to me, he seems like the type of player that gets paid $6.5 million a year that really helps your defensive line.
I agree. That's exactly the kind of the price mark I was thinking of. I would pay that money in a heartbeat if they could find a way to move it. We'll see if they do. I think he's actually as good a scheme fit for what Eberflus wants to do as almost any other player on this roster.
Carl Lawson.
I think they potentially could bring him back. I mean, he had his history with the defensive line coach in the Jets. I think it makes some sense as a rotational guy.
Yeah, I mean, at that point, you're just looking for he got basically the vet minimum last year. Do that again. Like, I mean, you've got a pass rusher coming off a torn ACL. Like, you just need numbers at that position. I don't see why they wouldn't want to bring him back. And I don't see why Carl Lawson wouldn't want to come back either. It wasn't like there were a bunch of teams last year banging down his door to get him to come into camp. So I would bring back Carl Lawson. Anybody else that
I got a couple. I think Damone Clark. Like, that's to me one of the most interesting ones, because now you're talking about a guy who really didn't get along, or whatever was going on at the previous coaching staff. They weren't a fan of Damone Clark. And even though, if you go back and look and watch, Damone Clark had some really good football games last year.
I don't know what was happening.
So I wonder if, if Eberflus looks at Damone Clark as kind of the ball of clay for him to form a little bit. I mean, if he doesn't look at him like, hey, I could make a Terrell Edwards out of this guy, right? Like, I mean, he has that kind of athleticism and speed. Like, I think I could do that. So I think he's an interesting guy to keep an eye on. And that leads me to another one, Marquise Bell. Where are they playing Marquise Bell next year? He is still on this team, by the way. Still, I think he's a restricted free agent, if I'm not mistaken.
So he'll be back probably at the original round tender. Although, man, I could see the Titans sniffing around there as well, because we know how much Bones Fossil loves him.
And that's why I think it's an interesting thing, right? Like, if you have a specific role for him, you should sign him, because I think he's a good player. But if you can't figure that out, maybe you do need to trade him. And the last name I'm going to throw out here is actually a trade suggestion.
Okay.
That is probably going to light my Twitter account on fire for even bringing this up. What if I was looking at who becomes a free agent in 2026, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that you could get decent trade value for someone like Ferguson right now, who is going into a contract year, was disappointing last year? He's going to play, like, even if he plays well this year, it's like you kind of have it in the back of your head, what's the ceiling here to a certain degree? I think we've seen the best of what his body type can be potentially. I don't know if, like, maybe there's more there. Maybe there's another level there. But considering what you see in the draft and what's available, is it potential that you get in on this a little bit early, see if you can get some value, maybe get a third or fourth round pick for Ferguson? I don't know, like, so because I wonder if he's a fit for this system as a blocker, because he is sort of undersized in that sense.
Yeah, traditionally, when you see these teams that use like more tight splits, you'll see these bigger tight ends.
Yeah,
they can kind of help with the defensive ends. I think the problem with Ferguson is he had such a bad year last year. What was it, 500 yards and 0 touchdowns? That I just don't know what you're getting, especially going into a contract year. When you were talking, I thought probably a 4th round pick is what the most you could get. And this is a good tight end class, so I don't think that's helping. Yeah. So it's like, would you rather try to get a 4th round pick, or play Ferguson for one more year and maybe you get a 5th round comp pick back 2 years from now? I don't know. But they also could just determine, hey, he's just not a fit, and we want to go out and get somebody else that makes our offense a little bit more dynamic or is a better blocker. I could see that as well.
I mean, I keep pushing Tyler Warren on the show. I understand that, but this is why, right? Like, he's coming up, and I don't know where I feel about Ferguson. And again, this was a guy that we were hoping would be the second target on this team. Like, I think if he's not going to be a great receiver, like a plus receiver, then he's not a good fit for what they're trying to do as a blocker, and that's going to become more and more important this season. The future may need to be now as far as solving that problem for the future, because tight end is such a hard position to develop. Mm-hmm. You may want to pull the trigger on one of these. It doesn't need to be Tyler Warren, but you may want to pull the trigger on a tight end this year in the rookie class, just so you can start developing him for when eventually Ferguson goes.
I was listening to Todd McShay's podcast this morning, and he was comparing Tyler Warren to Rob Gronkowski, and all I could think is, oh, don't let Landon hear this. He's going to be so excited if he hears that comment.
Better than Rob Gronkowski.
Man,
I'm just lighting my account
already out of control. All right, that is it for today's show. Way to end the show on a banger. Go download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Check out the show on YouTube as well. Follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. Make sure you send him all of your Jake Ferguson trade ideas and Tyler Warren AI images. I'm at Marcus _Mosher. We'll see you right back here tomorrow.